Hello everyone, welcome back to Byte Marx. And joining us today is a guest that we've had before. Say hello everyone to Sibu Masters.
Hi, Amelia. It's great to be back. I think I enjoyed the last conversation that we got to have, and this is something that's kind of been plaguing my mind for at least the last 2 months. So I think I've come to a resolution regarding NFTs, specifically how they can relate to art and how I relate to them. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about my journey and foray into the world of crypto art.
Yes. Today's topic, if you'll remember, viewers, Sibu was with us for our episode on futurism and sort of conservatism in art. In terms of subject, Sibu, why don't you just quickly refresh the viewers as to your credentials and your experiences?
I'm an artist. I'm an art teacher. I've been an art teacher for the past 4 years. I like to host art shows, and I've had a fairly, I would say, outside the center experience when it comes to making art. I've participated in a lot of small underground shows. I've worked at large art fairs, and I've gotten some good insight into how the art market and the art world functions, specifically in a South African context. So one of the things that I think is a sort of universal experience for artists is a kind of undervaluation of your work. People will like it a lot, but not enough to pay high prices until you make a name for yourself in the secondary market. And the problem with the secondary market is a lot of the time that only occurs after you're dead, because there's now a permanent scarcity for works that you can no longer produce. So the works that you have produced go up in value for that reason, if they had any value before. And if you are alive, you don't see any royalties from those secondary sales. So early in the year, possibly around February, was the first time that I started to look into NFTs as something I could do myself. It wasn't the first time that I'd heard of NFTs, but prior to this point, I'd kind of dismissed them as, cryptocurrency garbage.
Just briefly for the viewers at home, what is an NFT actually? What is we're on track with the explanation.
Great, thanks. I was going to ask, is this something I can take for granted, or should I explain? So, an NFT is, it's an acronym, it's an abbreviation. It stands for
non-fungible token.
Non-fungible token. And the idea of fungibility basically means equivalent exchange, essentially. So, if I gave you 10 Rand or any amount of currency, it wouldn't really matter what the what composition it is. I could give it to you in coins, I could give it to you as a note, I could even give it to you electronically. It would hold the same value. And that's the idea of it being fungible. Whether I give you 10 Rand in 1 Rand, 2 Rands, or a mixture, doesn't matter. The value in the end is the same.
Yeah, every Rand is equivalent to every other Rand.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter what date is on the Rand, how many dents or scratches, or whether it's a special edition Rand. It's still worth 1 Rand when it comes down to using it as currency. Then the non-fungibility would be when something is not, you can't exchange it for something else. So it has a sense of uniqueness. So an individual coin in your collection might be, it might have a monetary value that you could swap it out for, but that specific object is its own thing. There isn't another coin quite like it. So that's sort of where I guess the idea of collectibles comes in. It's something that is exceedingly or approaching uniqueness, rarity.
Yeah, the example I was going to give is sort of trading cards.
Yes.
Because even though, every trading card is a card, most cards are not really equivalent to other cards. Like a Magic the Gathering, I think it's a Black Lotus, is not equivalent to some basic land. even though they might be printed on the same paper and so on and so forth. So magic cards are not fungible in the sense that one magic card is not equivalent to another, but one unit of currency is always fungible. I just wanted to make that clear in the mind of the audience as we move forward. But please continue.
No, perfect. It's a great explanation. So yeah, like I also like to think of, people are non-fungible, so we can fulfill some of the roles,
anyway.
do some of the things. We should be. But how we're treated that's not always the case. But so NFTs basically are a statement. It's a certificate, and it's a certificate that's logged on the blockchain. Do I need to explain the blockchain, or is that something?
Give it a Cliff Notes.
Cliff Notes. So you can think of a blockchain as basically like a digital ledger based on consensus. So it's not a private thing that can be only changed by one person, but it's also not something like Wikipedia where anyone can go in and make edits. So all edits are logged, all changes are tracked. So that means that the authenticity of interaction or a transaction or a minting in the case of NFTs can be pinpointed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically where the non-fungibility lies, in that for an NFT, it is basically etched into this ledger that this is authentic. This item, though you may be able to copy the image, download the image, replicate the image digitally, because it is still, it's still just a string of bits and bytes that can be copied pretty easily. But the idea of ownership is now what is guaranteed.
So what you're saying is sort of simply an NFT is a proof of ownership. So NFTs, they're like, they guarantee that a person who holds the NFT for a particular thing can be certified as the owner of that thing. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's a combination of a certificate of ownership and a certificate of authenticity. So it proves that you own it, but it also proves that what you own is the real thing. So while other people might have an identical copy or version of that thing, you own the original. You are the only person who has claim to the ownership of that thing. But it's also not quite that, because it's a very self-referential thing. All it says is that you own the token, you own the NFT. You don't own the image, you don't own the artwork, and you don't own any of the intellectual property rights around the object or the artwork, whatever it might be. I'm just using artwork as sort of shorthand. It could be a replay clip of basketball. It could be a randomly generated assortment of pixels. But artwork is basically the word I'll use to talk about this. So it says that you are the owner of that artwork. And when you own a thing, you also have the opportunity to sell it on. So here's sort of where I think the NFT becomes alluring to artists and collectors, as well as people who basically want to do, I guess you could call it like a flip. You want to buy it at a price and then sell it at a higher price in the future. So the thing that makes NFTs appealing, and the thing that kind of got me interested in it initially, is that the artworks that were being produced, ignoring the quality of the works, were very much of the internet. They were digital art that were made to be digital art. It wasn't important to replicate traditional styles or traditional appearances or aesthetics. It wasn't important to make reference to historical events, political events, cultural touchstones from the real world. You could make something that was entirely the internet.
A lot of sorry, but I was just going to say, a lot of the NFT art that I've seen looks like memes. A lot of it looks like memes.
Yes, a lot of it is memes. And that was one of the first things that kind of started to set me off, because my first experience of NFTs was actually through a website called Super Rare. I'd seen a South African artist who was making really nice paintings, digital paintings, sell some of her work on Super Rare. I didn't really put like much thought to it, so okay, that's great, good for her. And then I clicked the link one day and I saw that she was like selling these paintings that were, good for like 1 to 5 Ethereum. And at the time, that meant that she was basically getting anywhere from like 1,800 to I get, what would that be, like 9,000? I don't know. My math is bad, but a significant amount of money in dollars. And with the exchange rate to South African rands, that basically meant that a single artwork could be the equivalent of like in excess of a month's ordinary wages.
Whoa.
So that was appealing.
I can see why.
Yeah, it's something that I'm making works anyway. Showing them off online and getting likes on Instagram and Facebook for it, retweets on Twitter if I'm lucky. But aside from the practice and the benefit of getting better at my work, I'm not really getting much in the way of a return on the time spent.
A material compensation.
Yes. And when I think about making physical artworks, when you make a physical artwork, you are expending more than just time and energy. You are actually consuming resources.
Yeah, paint and paper and all that
paint,
stuff.
paper, clay, all of that. There's a sort of there's a presence. There's a noticeable expenditure of the materials that you use to make the artwork. And it always makes me think of something that one of my lecturers said when he saw a second year's work. And the second year wasn't in the studio at the time, but he looked at the work and he said, art is one of the best ways to take valuable materials and render them useless. And I think every artist has experienced this, where you take something, you have grand ideas and ambitious plans about what this is going to turn into, and you make a mess. And sometimes you can start over, sometimes you can't, and you just cut your losses and you try again. So art is an expensive hobby, it's an expensive profession, and you often don't really get compensated fairly.
Unfortunately,
if you sell your work, you have to sort of bear in mind what the market will bear. So that's why you often find that people move away from where they developed to somewhere where their work will be purchased.
There's the art market is unfortunately a very high-end consumer market. It's very rare that artists can make a living by selling art to regular people. Almost always the people who they're trying to sell to are in a socioeconomic class way above them.
Yeah, definitely. And with NFTs, the sort of the marketing line was that this was the equalizer. You could now circumvent the art market and make money off of your work in perpetuity, because part of the fact that it's a logged log of transactions means that you can actually get royalties. So each time the artwork sells in the future, if it appreciates, actually whether it appreciates or not, you will get 10% of that sales price. So if it appreciates, you're great. If it doesn't, then it's just a nice surprise every once in a while when someone decides to sell off the artwork. You get a couple of fractions of Ethereum in your Luna wallet.
Yeah, you're making money in a way that you couldn't otherwise. Your art is generating value for you rather than necessarily just hoping that it'll sell once.
Yes, exactly. So with regards to that, it's not actually very different from the traditional art market in any way. Because as I was sort of looking into the NFTs, trying to get a better understanding of it, how to do it, because in my mind I thought, okay, if I get rejected by these websites that curate their artists and the work that they put up, if I get rejected by them, I'd still like to try and see how far I can go with this experiment. So how can I mint an NFT on my own? So I found this website called OpenSea.io, which is basically like the sort of Castle Call equivalent of the sort of digital online marketplace. So anything goes. You can upload your artworks, you mint them, you pay the gas price, which requires you to buy some Ethereum, which I want to put a pin in that because that's a point that I want to get to next.
Yeah, sure.
You buy a bit of Ethereum, you mint your artwork, you put it up, and you hope that someone sees it. You hope that maybe one of the blogs or websites that troll through the drops looking for sort of hidden gems might boost you. You'll upload the fact that you've made this NFT and showcase it to your following online and hope that one of them is, in this crypto space and will be willing to
put some money on it.
With a couple of, spend some money on it, throw it your way. Or you hope you just get lucky and someone sees it, they like it, they buy it. So in that sense, it's no different from taking your art to like an open call exhibition or taking your artwork to Twitter or Instagram and showing it off and saying, this is available, this is for sale. And then the things like super rare, they'll be they'll be the equivalent of your more traditional galleries where they curate a space. They have a sort of a clientele essentially that
who are looking for
marketed to.
They're looking for rarer versions of NFTs. Because like you said, an NFT isn't necessarily something that prevents artwork from being duplicated, but what it does confer to you is ownership. And because it does confer to you ownership, well, people are strange. And what we tend to see is that when people have ownership of a thing, that's more actually important from a market perspective than actually the thing itself. And lots of people tend to, you mentioned that there was an NFT market. And what these people are trading is the NFT, the ownership to the thing. And in a way, almost, it's a little bit speculative. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the way some people might trade for like futures and things like that, where they're not necessarily trading on the real value of a thing. They are trading on the presumptive value of a thing that is guaranteed by A, the NFT, which also in and of itself is a confirmation of rarity, right? You mentioned earlier on that many artists, their work only becomes popular when they die because no more of their work can be produced. I guess in a similar vein, NFTs represent something like that because you can only make one NFT of a particular kind once. And it is kind of weird for normal people to kind of grapple their head around why people are spending a lot of money on this, like, in some cases, millions of dollars. But that is just essentially what it is. It's the same underlying concept, but brought forward into a digital age. Am I off base there?
No, you're not. But there's one thing that I would like to sort of make mention, a spanner in the works. The NFT sort of confirms the rarity of that NFT. So the NFT can be split into editions, as with a normal artwork, or it can be a one-off, where it's an individual token and there's only a singular artwork attached to it. However, the problem that has cropped up lately, because whenever there's money to be made, people will find a way of doing it with as little effort as possible and probably through unscrupulous means.
Of course. Naturally.
So, one of the things that people have done is basically bots that scour Instagram and Twitter. Whenever anyone asks, is this available as an NFT, it triggers the bot, which then gets the image and mints it and then sells it off. Then there's also the idea of, I don't know what to call it exactly. I suppose you could call it piracy. It's not really forgery. But where an artist who doesn't want to or doesn't know about NFTs or simply hasn't gone through the effort of creating their own NFTs suddenly finds their work available on an NFT site, a platform selling NFTs. Most recently, I saw an artist who had actually passed away. Their work being sold as NFTs, obviously without their permission.
Oh, geez.
So the other issue with NFTs that has sort of come to light is that it actually doesn't guarantee any sense of authenticity at all. So, initially when I saw the NFTs, booming, I thought, okay, this is probably a clever idea. The big issue that cryptocurrencies face is that they're not really currencies. Nobody's using them for transactions.
Yeah, in a day-to-day sense. It's
yes.
I make the joke that the only people who are into cryptocurrency are nerds on the internet and like drug dealers.
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, like for a while, it was also like people who were selling and trading magic cards.
So nerds and drug dealers.
Yeah, basically. So I figured that the main aim for NFTs is to lend a sense of credibility to cryptocurrency, specifically Ethereum. And at the outset, I felt comfortable with that because, in my mind, I'm not a person who likes to gamble or speculate on the future value of things. To me, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Yeah, true.
And that kind of that mentality also shapes how I price my work. Because while I might have an idea of what the work is worth, I also want to make sure that if I'm putting it up for sale, it's going to sell, because I can do more with the money than I can with an artwork gathering dust in my closet. Someone else will get more enjoyment out of it, even if, as long as what I'm getting is significantly more than what I spent making it, I'm happy. What it gets sold for after that, it doesn't matter too much to me. But the NFTs seemed like a way of increasing the amount of money that can come out of the effort of making an artwork. And for the amount of money that was seemingly going around, it felt like, if the role I play is I make something, kind of dubious seem a little less dubious, but in the end, it's not really all that harmful, I don't see the point in not trying it out. But I don't know, I'm one of the few people who I think reads end user license agreements and patch notes to see if there's anything that's going to screw me over. So I read more on NFTs. I didn't want to just rush into it. And that's when I came across the environmental impact of the blockchain activity. So I mean, like, the first time I heard about Bitcoin, I think, was in 2013 or 2014. That's like the person I was dating at the time had a housemate whose partner had started mining crypto, and at the time he showed me the rig that he had, and it was basically just like a motherboard with 3 GPUs in it. So like for the entire last 8 years, that's what I thought a crypto mining operation looked like. Just a couple of computers with graphics cards plugged in.
Just as a side note for our gamers in the audience, even if you aren't necessarily on board with what we're trying to come with here, you should still, of course, be against cryptocurrencies because they have kind of destroyed the graphics card market. Because GPUs that are used in making graphics cards are invariably useful for cryptocurrency mining, they have the fact that people keep buying up GPUs to use them for cryptocurrency mining and not for playing sweet games has really, really dampened the ability of regular people to afford graphics cards, even as time has gone on. So I think that's just even if there weren't some environmental impacts, which we will get into now, there are still other secondary knock-on effects from people and their I would say almost slavish devotion to a fake nonsense currency, but that's my hot take for today. But please continue.
Yeah, so I mean, I had no idea of actually what it was, what the resources that go into creating cryptocurrency, logging transactions, and minting NFTs was. When I found out, I was flabbergasted. I mean, just the idea of the scale, was mind-blowing, and it's not something that's really intuitive, because when we think about the words that we use, mining, a miner goes down into the ground, and through their labor they extract something. So that something could be useful, could be completely superfluous, but there is an action and there's an outcome, and it feels like there's kind of a close link between the effort expended and the outcomes as a result. Coal miner goes down into the coal shafts, comes out with coal, and we know that they're going to come out with coal because that's already been established. This is a vein of coal. Likewise for pretty much anything else. However, with cryptocurrency, I suppose a big aspect of it is the idea of rarity. Mm-hmm. So not every computer that is calculating is going to end that calculation with the reward of a Bitcoin or a Dogecoin or an Ethereum. So the effort expended per Bitcoin or whatever it might be is essentially spread across the network. It's not contained to the singular, processing unit that solved the equation. So in that sense, the scale of what's used is astronomical. I mean, minting a singular NFT, according to certain metrics, would use the equivalent of like 3 months of electricity in Luxembourg. And when I looked at it in that scale, the impact of my actions would far outstrip any benefit that I would gain. I felt that it was no longer an ethical thing to pursue. But that's my outlook on it. I don't think it's an ethical thing for anyone to pursue, but if I think about the difficulty of making a living as an artist, where your work is exploited in many ways and you are not really refunded for it in any way or compensated for it in any way that would approach fair, because in the end, artworks are, and I hate to say this, they don't really have much of a use function or use value.
The utility value.
Aesthetic. Yeah. It's an aesthetic thing, which is a cultural thing, which means it's what other people decide. It's what other people agree on. So, with that in mind, it does make sense that the art market, Christie's, has latched onto NFTs because, and this is going to sound really cynical, and it is, the art market is a massive thing. It's not a singular monolithic entity. The art market is not something that is, driven with a single idea of what is good art. The art market is, like most, exchanges under capitalism, it's geared towards maximization of profits, of money, of making sure that in the end you're making more than you're spending. And if you manage to cash out after selling whatever it is to the next person, you're in the clear, you're happy. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the artworks that are sort of being sold for high prices aren't necessarily better than ones that aren't. What they are better at is holding value. And in that sense, I don't think that NFTs and the way that they've blown up and the way that people are sort of flipping them from one buyer, from, you become a buyer to become a seller, so that you can make some money and then you buy the next thing that everyone wants and then you sell that. That's not different to how a lot of people consume art anyway. I think, for a lot of us, when we consume art to enjoy it, we don't really pay. And if we do, what we pay doesn't actually come close to covering the cost of any singular artwork. It probably just comes to, support keeping the lights on at the museum, at the museum or the gallery that we go to. Because, commercial galleries are free. They ply you with wine, they give you cheese and crackers, and it's in the expectation that you're going to buy an artwork. When you go to an art fair, you pay a ticket to enter, but that ticket is a pittance compared to the price tags on any of the artworks in there. That's just covering renting the space. When you go to a national government-run gallery or art center, you'll pay something like 10 Rand to 50 Rand max. And again, that's not covering the value of any of the artworks. So, the enjoyment that we get out of art is often completely divorced and separate from the price of the artwork itself. So in a way, I think, the NFTs are the first sort of perfect digital version or analog of something in the real world, because I can still go and look at every one of Beeple's artworks and feel exactly the same way I would if I'd seen them on Twitter on Instagram, when he originally posted them, as I would now, knowing that someone spent, a couple million, or I don't know how much, on that artwork. And that's, I'm not going to feel much, except maybe I'll feel a little bit of anger in the fact that, all this garbage was made as a sort of just throwaway content as part of a long-running project to just make something every day, which will mean that you're going to have huge variance in quality. And this is what people value, people spend real-world money on, versus seeing young artists who are honing their craft, who are skilled at what they do, but because they don't have a name, they can be marked down by potential buyers, negotiated down, saying, I like your work, but I don't think it's worth 6,000. Can I give you 4,000? And, just knowing that the NFT market doesn't actually eradicate any of that imbalance, it just perpetuates it in a new space, is another thing that kind of just puts a sour taste in my mouth. I don't think it does anything useful. And while that in and of itself is not an indictment against it, for the time being, I think it is actually something harmful. It's not more harmful than, actually no, it is more harmful than the regular, shadiness of the art market, because it's got such a high environmental impact on top of being another way for wealthy people to shift money around and probably also be siphoning money off of people who are hoping to make a quick buck.
So there, you've given me a lot. You've given the audience a lot to chew on, but I do have a couple of things that I want to throw back at you. So,
sure.
First up, I think I would agree with your assessment that something that I may be a little bit too cynical on, because I've always seen a lot of people. There are some people online in places like India and China who talk about how cryptocurrency will be the great equalizer between people of color and not people of color, to challenge traditional sort of economic relationships. I don't think that's true even in the slightest, because if we look at these cryptocurrencies, if we look at these markets, they are largely dominated by a few wealthy people who have the ability to buy into those markets. Just because you make a new cryptocurrency doesn't actually mean that regular normal people can even access that value or whatever that is contained within. More to the point, because it's not used as a transactional currency, it's not used by regular people, and it doesn't really have any normal use in the world. invariably you are in my feeling is that these markets, stuff like NFTs, are perpetuating the same underlying relationship that capitalism has already used to, say, corrupt the art market, but they're just doing it in a way that's even more abstract. I would totally agree with you. There. I think that even if NFTs weren't as environmentally damaging, I think that it's naive to think that a system that is produced under capitalism with strict capitalist sort of operations, i.e., generate value, increase revenue, etc., is going to do anything to change the underlying relationship between sort of the people who are subject to capitalism and the people who control it. Do you think that's fair? Am I being a little bit too cynical?
No, I think that's completely accurate. I agree with you there completely. One thing that I will say is, bearing in mind that I disagree with it. That's the reason why I'm not going into cryptocurrency. I also recognize that people need to eat. People need to make money off of things. If there is an artist out there who made life-changing money, great, good for them. I hope they cashed out. I hope they don't get sucked into the idea of holding and trading and sharing the green and the pink soy jacks when the line goes up and down. I don't want people to get sucked into that because I think that's dangerous. But if you got in early and if you got out and you made a significant amount, great.
A lot of this actually does remind me of, especially you're talking about the meme language. A lot of this reminds me of the people who were talking about the GME, Wall Street bets, all of that stuff.
Yes.
Because now that the dust has largely settled on that, a lot of the reports seem to indicate that the biggest people who won were other hedge funds who were who were capitalizing on the destruction of another hedge fund to basically consolidate more of their power. And people who bought into this idea that, ordinary people were rising up, that was a falsehood. That was a lie that was being sold to people. That being said, though, there were individual people who did manage to get in and get out with some more money, and maybe, power to those people. But it wasn't a general system. It wasn't anything even approximating a systemic change of the power relationship between the wealthy and the poor. It was just, in a way, kind of a blip. I think NFTs are a very new market. Even though they've existed for quite a while. I think the first NFT was sold in it was 2010 thereabout. 2014 the first NFT was Quantum. I think it was sold at $7 million or valued at $7 million, and that was 2014. And by the way, people, Quantum is a video that is a spinning dollar symbol inside a picture frame. So how's that for irony? That it's valued at $7 million. But it's only recently that I've noticed that NFTs have just kind of had an exponential sort of explosion in their interest in their art. Jack Dorsey sold an NFT. There are movies that are now trying to come out as NFTs. Nike, I know, has a patent for using NFTs on their sneakers. They call them crypto kicks. It's the most ridiculous nonsense I've ever heard of. And even, more lately, I think Godzilla versus King Kong has an NFT collection. So that's just, I feel like a lot of this is early speculation in a booming market, but I don't really think that there's any, lasting power here. If anything, I think what will happen is that NFTs will come to be dominated by a same circle of really, really rich people who will simply use the value of NFTs to generate more value for themselves and price out most of the other people in the market. And as always, the artists are kind of stuck in the middle here because, as you said, people have to eat. I totally understand if an artist wants to use an NFT to try to make some money, but it doesn't really fundamentally change the relationship between the people who are making the art and the people who are buying it.
No, not at all. And I think one thing that also that I didn't mention, but that has sort of been an issue that I've seen discussed, is the idea of dead links, and they don't take too long to accumulate. So, I mean, if you just look for an answer to a problem you're having with some old hardware or old software, a lot of the time, whatever image host the forum used to use, or maybe there was a redesign of the backend or whatever it is, but those links to pictures, those links to previous articles are disappearing constantly. The internet is permanent, but not always. And when you look at what a NFT is, it's like a permanent link to something that isn't necessarily going to always be there. And that's not necessarily different to real world art. You can lose artworks in a fire, you can just lose them to the effects of time.
Paint will degrade and stuff like that.
Yeah. So there's really no guarantee in NFTs, in art in general. I was looking up something that I got a little interested in earlier, maybe 2 years ago, was this resurgence of formalist art. So formalism in art is basically the idea that an artwork can be appreciated for what it contains. You don't need to look at it in terms of context or historical meaning or symbolism. Just look at the formal aspects, the color, the line, the composition, all that jazz, and appreciate it for that. So that idea came about at the same time as the abstract expressionists of post-World War II America. They were sort of the first big American movement that cemented New York as the central hub of the art world. And you got things like Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, artworks that were very strange, non-representational, large fields of color, splatters of paint, things that the ordinary person feels a little removed from. But when you get to see them in person, you can get absorbed in the sort of physical presence of the artwork. So there was a resurgence a few years ago where people called it kind of pejoratively zombie formalism. Where
that's a cool name.
The reanimated corpse of a gone or bygone era. This movement that came and went is now back again. And the thing about formalist art is because it makes no reference to the real world and it's purely aesthetic, it is easy to put anywhere. Okay, you can put it in any office, you can put it in any bank sitting room.
Yeah, you've probably seen it and not even realized.
Yeah, like one of my sort of favorite things to laugh about every once in a while is that I managed to get a sexual innuendo into the Talcon collection. When I was in university, I was stunned that they bought it. But most of their other works are like very innocuous. Not maybe that's unfair for Talcon, but a lot of works in corporate are like usually quite innocuous, apolitical.
Yeah, it's got to be the most bland, inoffensive thing because, if, like I've always said this, if you're in the capitalist world and you take a strong opinion of anything that maybe challenges like the status quo or gets people to think, that's bad. So
yeah, that's bad for your pocket.
It's bad for your pocket, yeah.
So with regards to that, because it was so easily useful, it was selling really well. But like most movements, crazes, fads, they don't last. It's not to say that they stop, but they fall out of favor. They're no longer the must-have flavor. So there were a lot of people who bought artworks at inflated prices with the hope that one day they will be worth
even
something more.
Yeah.
And sometimes they were worth even less, and you lost your money there. I think the only way that you can avoid feeling like you're losing money is to not invest in art necessarily, but to invest in artists. And like I've said this many times before, but maybe this will probably be the first time any of the audience will hear it. But each time you support an artist, you are giving them impetus to make more art. They will get better. Their work will increase in the value of what it is. And by keeping a person going, by keeping a person making work, you increase the chances of someone else appreciating their work too. And this is kind of the most natural way of making an artist's work more valuable, is to actually value the work. It's manipulated by top collectors. They have a lot of skullduggery where there will be sort of like shady auctions where they buy their own work back just to prove that the work has been increasing in value.
To drive up the price.
Or they'll loan it to prestigious museums so that adds to the air of this particular artwork. Or when they sell it on, they'll sell it to another prestigious collector just to make it seem as if there is some real value behind it. And all of those are sort of like the sort of, I don't know, necromancy of art. So it happens after the life of the artist, or at least it happens in the aftermarket of the work. But if you are buying directly from the artist, if you are supporting the artist in their work, you're doing a lot more good than reselling NFTs or trying to, like you said, speculate on the future value of an artwork.
Yeah, I would almost say that maybe a better relationship between artists and the consumers would maybe be one more of direct patronage. Now, people who are familiar with medieval history, or at least passing familiarity, will know that many of the great works that we consider to be, for example, in the European canon, like the Sistine Chapel and so on, were produced because a very powerful institution patronized, literally provided for, an artist. I was reading today, or yesterday, that there were even very specific laws about which kind of part of the art could be done by a person. So if you were in like Renaissance Italy and you had commissioned an artist, a master, you had to carefully make sure that their apprentices only did like limited things. Like, they only repeated like small details in the background. When you were paying for someone, you were paying for their hand, to make the art. But I do think that the idea of commodifying art to the degree that we operate it like a marketplace, that we primarily have artists producing work to sell in some kind of market environment, I think is ultimately detrimental. I think even though art is not necessarily something of utility, I think all human beings have a desire to either make art or appreciate it in some form, right? And a society that is bereft of art, I think, is worse off. However, the way that we do it now, I just don't think works. I think maybe it would be better if there would be a wider patronage directly of people who want art and provide material incentives, i.e. funding to the people that they want. And I know already, at least to some degree, this is something that happens in things like the music world, where there are maybe musicians who fund their career via donations on Patreon, or they have regular contributors who pay them more of a regular fee to keep making music. And I've done this myself, and I've noticed that over time, maybe years, maybe months, the music does actually get better. Just because someone has more time and stability to dedicate to their craft. And do you think that would maybe be preferable to something like an NFT sort of system? Because I think in some respects, and I do want your opinion on this, but I do think the NFT market is maybe a little bit here to stay, but I also don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's probably permanent, but I think because of how analogous it is to physical world art, that's why. Whether it stays or goes, I don't think in the end it makes a good impact. I think you're right. It would be better to have ways of directly supporting artists, because one of the things that I've seen get in the way for a lot of the people that I studied with is simply the need to survive. When you don't have, familial support, it's difficult to take the risk of living as an artist when you don't make works that are appreciated by the market, it's
yeah.
difficult to make a living purely off your work as an artist. So things like Patreon, things like I think it was called Coffee or Kofi,
Kofi,
that's how
yeah.
you pronounce it, or even just like you said, directly buying from the artist. Those are things that are quite helpful because the other thing, when we look at successful artists, a lot of the time there is that idea of commercialization as a brand. It's not to say that they're selling out or making works that are like purely based on the whims of buyers, but it takes a certain personality to work that way. One of the things that I've noticed about the exhibitions that I put on, most of the artists who I exhibit are not very gregarious people. They don't really like to talk. And when you think about like the sort of stereotypical artist, that makes sense. When you think about when I think about who are the most successful artists among my friends, very few of them are among the ones that I remember making amazing work, but they are the ones who are willing to put themselves out there.
Yeah.
So, I think there's definitely room for support in the art world, in the art market, where, gallerists or exhibitors or curators who are better at talking about the work, getting it out there in that way, there should be space there is still space for that now. If one day we're in some sort of like post-scarcity setup, then I think people will really be able to kind of make the art that they want to make. There's a joke on the internet that if you want to make money, just appeal to furries.
Oh yeah.
And
I was about to bring up the one successful real example of where you have a marketplace, a non-marketplace setting really, is the furry market, because furries spend a lot of money on their personas and their art and more salacious things, shall I say. And they directly patronize artists and there are many of these people who are able to make a living as a furry artist. And maybe they don't necessarily want to be making furry art, but it is a very stable, very lucrative form of, employment for an artist. And I feel like if we could broaden that out into a wider sort of setting, then maybe I think, we could save art from the same cycle that it's kind of been trapped in since sort of the beginning of civilization, I think the NFT thing is maybe very worrying in a lot of ways because, as I mentioned earlier, there is an increasing abstraction. The NFT market, the way that it works, is not fundamentally different to a regular commercial market, but it does abstract things a little bit more. Understanding, like, for example, what an NFT is and how it relates to ownership, and it's a little bit more complicated than just buying the piece of art and having the piece of art, And I feel like as time goes on, maybe they will address the environmental cost. I don't think they will. I think that whenever there is a market incentive to generate profit, I think that incentive will take priority over whatever else is in consideration. And I feel like NFTs, if they become more accessible in other kinds of things, I'm waiting for the day I will wake up and I'll see like an NFT war game, an NFT miniature, or Games Workshop will release an NFT Space Marine. And I'm just worried that this kind of commodification, this abstraction of even just the ownership of a thing, will make everyone's lives, except for the mega wealthy, just even worse.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I think we're already in a pretty terrible spot of basically just being a digital renting class. We don't get to own anything anymore. We simply buy licenses, and those licenses are only useful for as long as we keep up with the payment, or for as long as the company exists, or simply chooses to maintain that product. I mean, we saw early in the year with the discontinuation of Adobe Flash. That's something that was a foundational experience in a lot of people's early interactions with the internet.
And their web animation and stuff like that. Yeah, it's gone forever in a way.
So that's like lots of, you can call it lowbrow, you can call it crass, but that's basically like that's a whole culture that
Yeah,
has
it would be
been
like
damaged.
people finding an ancient city and then just paving over it. A lot of people don't realize that the internet isn't as permanent as it seems.
Mm.
There is layers and layers and layers of society, just like in the real world, where civilizations build on other civilizations. The internet has its culture, as terrible as it can be, at times. And in a lot of ways, it's even less permanent than other things. Like, for example, the the PlayStation Vita and the PSP stores and stuff like that. All of that stuff. When a video game is no longer supported by the company, that's it. It's gone. You can't even play it anymore. And there are so many games that are just lost to time. Because archival standards are just terrible, and we don't preserve anything. In a lot of ways, the internet kind of mirrors sort of our capitalist obsession, sort of with commodities, and I guess also in a way NFTs do that as well, because you're not even owning the thing, you're owning a claim to own the thing, and
you buy the rights to say you own it.
Yeah, yeah. And you might not even actually own a real thing, right? You might, by the time, the NFT gets to you, the original digital artwork, could have been lost in like a hard drive crash or whatever. And it's a relentless drive forward without realizing that, everything is on fire behind. And and the fact that it is so environmentally damaging, I do think I don't want to completely mislead the audience and saying there are no solutions to the environmental problem of NFTs. There are some, including changing the way that they figure out how the NFT is calculated, but like I just don't meaningfully see that changing, because I don't think that markets respond to non-market incentives, right? Environmental damage is one of the dangers, right, that environmental damage poses, is that it's hard to conceptualize. It's very difficult for people to see the damage that's done by greenhouse gases. It's much easier for someone to see, oh yeah, there's acid rain, or there's poison air or something, but it's very difficult for them to experience that. And all our market solutions to climate change have not really worked, because climate change is a market-driven problem. So I can't see something like an NFT fundamentally changing the art world, because it is the same relationship. It is the same market system, but just, you should be very skeptical of someone who's trying to tell you that NFTs are going to be an equalizer, that they're going to be, the next, because it's a social problem and there are no technical solutions to social problems, you just can't, that's just not how society works. But this has been a very interesting talk about NFTs. I feel like at some point now we have to have you on just to talk about furry artists.
Please talk about
the furry artists.
Oh, furry artists.
Yeah, that cat has come out of the bag, unfortunately.
I'd have to bring on a friend for that one. I'm not.
Oh yeah, that would be lovely. Viewers at home, if you would like to have an episode dedicated exclusively to furry art, let us know, because I am willing to talk about it. I think it is a very interesting sociological phenomenon. But any final words, Sibu, on NFTs?
Yeah. Well, so not so much NFTs exactly, but art. I think one thing that kind of comes up a lot is that as artists, we are using the real world in some form to make our artwork. So what we end up with is a non-utilitarian object that was made from raw materials, and sometimes those raw materials can have bad impacts on the real world. And I think like, as an artist, I try to make as small an impact on the natural world as I can. So I don't use oil paints, for example, or I'll try to make use of recycled material. And that's sort of my outlook, and I hope that's an outlook that's shared with other artists, other people who make art. But I think the one thing that was kind of most disappointing with the NFTs is that I think we like to, or I do, maybe I'm alone in this, but we like to have this idea that the people that we like are good people. We like to think that people who make good art are also good people, that they have some concern and care for the world that they are in. And sort of seeing a lot of artists like Blur, for example, releasing NFTs when one of my favorite albums, I mean, not Blur, Gorillaz, same lead singer. When one of my favorite albums by Gorillaz was the Plastic Beach album, which was all about, climate disaster. So to see that, it was a big eye opener in a way, because it showed me that even though we're in the end stage of our environmental decline and what seems like the crisis point for global capitalism, there's maybe a lack of imagination of how we can do things differently. And NFTs kind of captured our collective imagination because it showed how our outcomes in the same system could be different for us personally, without seeing what the impact on everyone else would be. So the NFT issue for me is really that thought experiment of push a button, make 1 million, somebody dies, except it's push a button, make 40,000, several people get sick. And that was basically, thinking about it that way was the thing that pushed me away from it in the end. So if they're here to stay, great, can't do anything about that. But I think for anyone who disagrees with NFTs on principle, but likes the idea of artists having some kind of economic freedom, or even just freedom in general to make what they want to make, support the artist. Send them a message. If you like their work, ask them if you can buy it. If their price is too high, ask them if they do prints.
Mm-hmm.
If the price is still too high, talk about doing purchases in installments. But like you said earlier, a society without art is pretty bereft. So if you like the work, find a way of making sure it's sustainable for the artist. If that means sharing their work online, going to an exhibition once exhibitions are safe to go to, then make that effort, I would say.
Yeah, and
there are ways of getting around the problems that we're presented with.
Yeah, and then maybe one day we could live in a world where maybe you don't need to make art to survive. You can just make art if you want to, because everyone is taken care of with the great, tremendous capacity that we can produce. Human beings are very clever. We have the brain power to come up with something like NFTs, but also not the brain power to realize why we shouldn't come up with something like NFTs.
Yeah.
And I think that as you said, an artist could make a artwork by clubbing to death all of the baby seals, but that wouldn't. But if they are not willing to, consider the impact about doing that, I think it's a bit bad. But people are products of their environment. If artists are making decisions to survive, many of whom are, we can't necessarily disparage that. We have to hate the game, not necessarily so much the player, even though some players are worse than others. Thank you again for coming on to talk about NFTs. I do think they're here to stay, unfortunately. I really wish we would stop careening towards like the cyberpunk dystopia. I just every day I just think, why were all the cyberpunk writers prophetic instead of just like having a lark? It's anyway. let's not keep our audience too bad in the dumps. Support your artists, wear your masks, and be safe, everyone. Good night.
Thanks again.
Oh, also, leave a like if you want us to do an episode on furries.
Oh, yeah. That would be interesting, I think.